Okay.
Hello, 1, 2, 1, 2.
There you go.
1, 2. Can I have a little reverb?
Can you put out a little bit of 2K? You know, I want to ask questions that I know that you all want to ask, and of course we will do a Q&A as well. You worked for RFK.
I did. I worked for him when he was running for the Senate in New York, and that would be 1963, I think. I wrote his campaign songs. It led to getting a deal with the Columbia Records.
Oh, well?
He wrote me a letter and he said, look, I had no idea you were only 15. I was 15, but I had a goatee, so he thought I was older. And he said, so I can't bring you to Washington to give you a job, but I can maybe pull some strings at a record company and maybe get you a deal. The last gig I did with him was at Madison Square Garden. I played Madison Square Garden. I opened up before the Shirelles.
Wow. Amazing. So you're a member of the first graduating class of the Institute of Audio Research.
Yeah.
So how do you go from 15-year-old acoustic guitar, folk singer, rock band, signed to Columbia, to that, into the recording side? What was your journey?
Wow. So I had this rock band, and that was like the first of many rock bands. I toured with a group from Canada that had some Brits in it. That was called the Liverpool set. But in fact, I was the only guy who had been to Liverpool.
Oh, we can't gloss over going to Liverpool. Okay.
Yeah, because that's in 1965. And,
Yeah.
And that starts me on my journey.
So Jack and his friend, what was your friend's name?
Eddie Leonetti.
Eddie Leonetti. Like every kid in the US in the early, mid-60s, was a huge Beatles fan. And of course, everybody knew the Beatles were from Liverpool. So Jack and his friend decide they want to go to Liverpool to meet the Beatles.
Yeah, and to start a band and to make it and come back to America triumphant, you know.
Yeah.
So, or maybe not come back to America, who knows? So we worked, and he was a bandmate of mine in one of these bands that I had. And so the cheapest way to Liverpool was by tramp steamer. And a tramp steamer is it's a ship that's not connected with any major line whatsoever. And they just pull into whatever port is going to put something on the boat to send somewhere else. Basically, it was probably built in the 20s or 30s and was just a tin can, really. But it was $112 one way to Liverpool. And so we worked all summer, and in the fall, we booked passage to go to Liverpool. We were the only passengers. It wasn't a passenger ship, it was a freighter. And so we got on the ship, and the ship had come up from South America with a load of bananas. They dropped the bananas off in the Carolinas and picked up some whiskey, and then came to New York to pick up textiles. When we got on the boat, which was in late November, the tarantulas from the bananas were still on the boat, but they were dying because it was cold. So when you get in your bunk, you'd lay down and then, but they would usually be on the dying end of their journey here. But it was like, oh, Jesus. Then you had all this whiskey on board, so the crew was always drunk. I was like, who's in charge of this thing? You ate with the crew. We crossed the North Atlantic at the worst time of the year. Someone told me, you're crossing the North Atlantic in late November, early December? Yeah, why? Not a good idea. Not a good, 40-foot swells. So when you would eat with the crew, you would sit down at this table, and you'd wait for your food to come by, because the ship was, and it had wooden boards on. You'd wait for, here's your oatmeal, and there it went. Wait for it to come back, your coffee, and you wait for it to come back. So that was the trip. We went to Nova Scotia, then we went to Greenland, we went to Iceland, all this picking up and delivering stuff. We went into the North Sea to Norway. We went to Hamburg. This is like, come on, when are we getting off this boat? And then finally, Aberdeen, and then into the Irish Sea and down, and I heard pirate radio for the first time on my little transistor. And I was like, we're here. This is it. You know, we were hearing music we didn't hear in the States. It was great. So we pull into Liverpool after the sojourn, and immigration comes on board. Hello, boys. So what?
Where's your visas?
Yeah, where's your visas? Where's your... No, we don't have any visas. We have a passport. No. What are you doing here? Oh, we come to play. Oh, so you have a work permit? No, we don't have a work permit. So this guy from immigration says, well, here's the deal. You're not getting off this boat. When it leaves in 5 days, you're on it. And I remember my friend saying, like, what a fine mess this is. You realize we'll be on this boat the rest of our lives. Just traveling, you know. So that very night, I escaped from the ship. I got a big old coat from a drunk crew member, put on a cap, and walked down the gangplank. The only preparations we made for England was we had a few pounds sterling. And I had my Les Paul. He had his Moe's right. We had little champ amps and a knapsack. Anyway, I made my way down, left him. He wouldn't go with me. Walked out looking for, the cops or whoever was going to, nobody. Just go walk off the dock easily. I did. Got on a bus that said Central Liverpool. Got off the bus. It was like, wow, this is great. You're talking about an 18-year-old kid, Liverpool. And I was right across the street from a record store. I walked in and I bought the Rubber Soul album. It just come out. Just
1965.
Yeah. Went into a booth and played it. A bunch of kids came in with me who weren't buying but wanted to hear it. A little listening booth. I walked out onto the street and across the street, I'm like, I'm going to stay here. I love this. Across the street from the record store was a newspaper office, the Liverpool Echo, which is still the biggest newspaper in Liverpool. I walked in there and I said, these guys, they love like sensational stuff. So I went in and I told the receptionist that was there, I'm an American being held hostage on a ship in the harbor. And she just looked at me like, well, are you I said, oh, no, but I escaped. And that's why I'm standing here. And she said, just wait and I'll get someone to talk to you. And I thought, probably a shrink. But she brought an editor out and I told him the same story I just told you. And he said, that's very interesting. I'm going to take you back to the harbor. I see you get on that ship. Tomorrow I'll have every newspaper in the north of England and even some in London covering this story. And the deal is we have the exclusive, Liverpool. I said, okay. Went back on board with my Rubber Soul album. We played it all night. I told my friend Eddie this story. He said, the guy was full of shit. Nothing's going to happen. Listened to the record all night, went to sleep. In the morning, hey, you guys wake up. A bunch of newspaper people here. And I still have the picture of us on the... And then the next day we were on the front page of the Liverpool Echo with a story about us. And then the day after that, we're running out of time, but the day after that, the Liverpool Echo was affiliated with a TV station. They hired these girls to march up and down the front of the ship with signs that said, "Free the Yanks." And we would stand on the bow and wave at them, and they would scream like we were rock stars. It was all fake, but it was effective. Finally, immigration came on board and said, how did you do this? So they said, they're writing us and they're calling us saying, what are you guys doing? The poor American musicians that come over. And so they gave us a 60-day student visa. We had to ship our guitars back and the amp, which we did, and we were free. 2 days later, we were in a band. And we were hanging out at the Cavern Club and like really making the most of it. And one night, like a few weeks later, we're like after a gig, we're We were trying to pick up some girls. We were at a little cafe, and a guy comes over and he says, "Hey, aren't you two the Yanks in the newspapers?" We said, "Yeah, that's us." He goes, "Well, my friends around the corner want your autograph." It was immigration. The police, they put us in the car, took the car that went to a train in chains. We were in shackles. The train went to London. We changed trains. It went to Southampton. They put us on the first ship. Goodbye. Deported. So that was a sad story. Now, many years later, this is where it pays off.
Oh, yeah.
Many years later, I'm working at Record Plant. I'm the editor. I'm like the best editor that they have. And John has arrived. He's in another room to do the Imagine album. And they need to transfer some of the stuff. Some of it was just 2-track to multi-track. And there was a lot of editing, John's own handwriting about where to make the edits. And transfer all the stuff to multi-track. Some of it was 4-track, had to bounce up. Some of it was 16-track, had to go to 24. There was a lot of this stuff going on. A few days into this, and I'm doing it, and I'm hearing these songs before anybody else is hearing them. I'm flipping out, you know? This is amazing. And he's going to be doing overdubs on this stuff. But he's far from me. And they're in there, and it's like, it's all closed off. You're not getting anywhere near those sessions. Now, 4 or 5 days later, there's a knock on the door. He opens, it's John at the door. And he looks at me and he says, "Do you mind if I just sit in here for a while? I need to clear my head." I said, "Sure, I'm the guy doing your transfers and editing." He goes, "Yeah, that's great. You're doing a great job." And he sits down on the other side of a couch. He puts his feet up on the window. All I see is feet, sneakers, and cigarette smoke. And after about 5 minutes, I get up the courage to say to him, "I've been to Liverpool." And his head pops up and he says, "Liverpool? Where are you from?" I said, "I'm from New York." He said, "Why on earth would you want to go to Liverpool?" And I said, "Well, you know, I was a musician. I wanted to go to Liverpool and make it." And he said, "Well, how did that work out?" And I said, "Good and bad. Bad, I got deported. Good, I made a lot of noise before I did." And he looked at me and he said, "Were you one of those 2 crazy Yanks?" And I said, "Yeah, that was me." He goes, "You were on the front page of our hometown newspaper while we released a record. And it should have been us on the front page. And it was you." And he says, "And by the way, do you still have that Les Paul?" It was a 54 Black Beauty. And I said, "No, it's long gone." He said, "Wow." He goes, "I can't believe I'm meeting you. We laughed so hard about you. You know, seeing these guys that came over and they're like making all this noise. They're on the front pages and the stories." He said, "You know what? What are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, I'm your editor." He goes, "Now you're on the session." So now I go down to the main office. I'm in the main studio. I go in and Roy Cicala, the lead guy, says to me, "What are you doing here?" And I say to him, "I'm with him." Pointing to John. John goes, "No, he's working with us." And that was the beginning of a very long relationship because we got to be very good friends.
People say to me, "What does it take to be in the music industry?" And then I tell that story. You have to do big, bold things. You have to really...
Yeah, you do.
You can't just be like, "Oh, I'm sitting in my bedroom." I mean, I get so many people like, I've got a Facebook page and a SoundCloud link to my music. Why am I not famous? You know? Yeah, I mean, you've gone from RFK to John Lennon.
Well, there was a lot of, I mean, the last album that I did as an artist was produced by the Isley Brothers. So they were my producers. And that was the last record I did. I didn't like the way they mixed the record or all of the overdubs they did over basically New York version of Led Zeppelin. And so they let me mix it, which was a disaster. But lucky the engineer at A&R Studios threatened to tie me to a chair if I touched the board again. And he finished the record.
Who was the engineer? Tony Mack.
And so he did all the Isley Brothers records. But anyway, he did a great job, and I was fascinated by the amount of control he had over the music. It was wonderful to watch, and I'm thinking, this is probably more for me than that. I think this has run its course. Am I playing bass or guitar? And so
you played with Chuck Berry as well.
I did play with Chuck Berry. I played bass with Chuck Berry. I mean, it was a long career, and I was on the road for many years with different people. And so I asked him for a job at A&R, and he said, "No way, you're a danger to the whole process. But I'll send you down to a competitor, and maybe you could wreck them." And so he sent me down to Record Plant, a few blocks down the street. And I walked in, and Paul Prestipino was at the reception area. He was a maintenance guy. And I said, "I'm looking for a job." And he said, "We need a janitor." Me. He said, "Great, you're hired." And that's how I started at Record Plant, 1969.
Wow. You and I, when we were working together a few years ago, talked a lot about Roy Cicala when he was still alive.
Yeah.
We even talked about trying to make a documentary on his life.
Yeah.
Because he's definitely an unsung hero.
Oh.
But mainly of his own making. He didn't want the big credits.
No, and he was a genius. To listen to the records that he's done is just incredible. And to for him to be your mentor, to assist him. So when you think of the people that he brought in, myself, Shelley Ackes, Jimmy Iovine, Jay Messina, he was a guy that, Greg Calby, he was a guy that taught you how to do things. And he had a strange way of doing it, but if you were with him, you were gonna go with it. And then what he'd do is he had so many clients. He would give you those clients. He'd say, "Okay, now you take over here. Okay, you do this," and that's how it worked. He was incredible, and he was just even tempered, and he never wanted the spotlight on him, ever, ever, ever. He just didn't. Very much like Shelley, he never wants the spotlight. Not like me. Give me the spotlight. Yes.
Shelley told me the story about looking at the meters and saying to Roy, the meters are pinned. They've been slammed the whole time. And he's like, "Well, how does it sound?" And he says, "Sounds great."
Yeah.
And he's like, "So?"
Yeah.
And then he said he put a piece of paper over it which said plus 1 million or something like that.
Yeah. All the meters were blacked out if you were working with Roy. He was just incredible. And he had a rack that nobody knew how to use except him. And I mean, you could do this in Pro Tools now, but there were a lot of different compressors in it. They're CBS compressors, by the way. And what would happen, and he had these things all EQ'd, and so a vocal would come on, and then things would move out of the middle. And then the vocal would go, and they would come back in again. I mean, Roy's rack, it was called. It was incredible what he could do to a mix with this rack. Incredible.
Go back and listen to Mind Games. It's insane how good it sounds.
Yeah, that's Roy's rack in there.
Right.
Because that vocal is hardly there.
Yeah.
And it's buried in this reverb.
Yeah.
And yet you can understand every word.
Before working with John more consistently, you actually did a lot of stuff with Yoko.
I did.
You did approximately Infinite Universe and Feeling the Space, both in 1973.
Yeah.
How did you get it?
That was, like I said, I became really good friends with John, and John, because I had no agenda, and I think that's a big plus with John, no agenda. He'd call me up, want to go out to a party, want to do this, want to do that, got watch my back. Yeah, okay. And then he was like, "I want you to work with Yoko." And so and then I gained her trust, which isn't easy because, a lot of people gave her shit all the time. How that worked was she asked me about some piano thing she wanted to do. And I said to her, "Yoko, I don't care if you sit at the bench and play or get inside it. It doesn't matter, whatever sounds really cool and unique, I'm good with it." And we did a lot of unique things,
Would one of those be the Dead Rat?
Yes. we were doing a track. It never came out on anything, but we did a lot of tracks that didn't come out on anything. And this particular track it was just a rhythm track. It was called Dead Rat, was the name of it. Nice title, pretty cool, especially if you live in New York. You like them dead. Anyway, it ran, and then there was 8 bars of nothing, and then the band picked up again, right in the middle, 8 bars of nothing, like would have been a solo of somebody, but there was nothing. So I said to Yoko, so what happens in the 8 bars here? She said, you'll find out. And then she came in one day, and her assistant Toshi had a shoebox, and she said, it's time for the solo in Dead Rat. And I looked at the box, and I got a pencil, and there was a dead rat in the box. So it was going to be the Dead Rat solo. So I told my assistant, Dennis Ferranti, Grammy winner, by the way, Dennis, I told Dennis, okay, put the rat out on a stool, put an 87 over it, and let's run this thing. So he came back in. All I ever saw of Dennis, because he had his back turned to me the whole time, was his shoulders going up and down, because he was laughing so hard. But you couldn't laugh, at anything Yoko was doing. But he was losing it. Anyway, so we run the track, and I'm sit there. The solo section comes up. Bring up the fader. I looked at Yoko and I said, I don't know. It's not doing anything for me, I'm not doing much. She said, no, me neither. I said, I got an idea. So I said, Dennis. He said, yeah, boss. I said, where's that mic? He said, well, it's over his head. I said, no, the rat's dead, Dennis. The rat's not going to say anything. What we need to do is capture the rat's soul. So you got to move the mic over about the midsection of the rat. So now he goes out. He's got his back to me again. And he's moving the mic, and his shoulders are going. I know he's dying. And now he comes in. I said, okay, let's run it. So now he runs it. The solo part comes up, and I put the fader up. I'm like, yeah, that's it. Yep. And I turn to Yoko and I say, I think we really got it that time. She said, I agree. That was good. I said, okay, we're done. Get rid of the rat.
It's a rap on the rat.
That is a rap on the rat. Another thing we did one time, she brought in these little violins that were about this big, and they had little strings on them, and a whole bunch of them. And she had steam engines, these little miniature steam engines, and they drove the bow. And she wanted me to record this orchestra of steam-driven
mini violins.
Yeah, and so we had to make these gobos to try to get rid of because the violins didn't make very much noise, but the steam engines were like noisy as shit. That reminds me, one thing that I worked on, one record I worked on, was Don McLean's American Pie.
Oh, masterpiece.
There you go.
And produced by a guy named Ed Freeman. And Ed wanted everything captured live. So that meant that Don was going to sing and play acoustic guitar. But he had a small voice and a loud guitar. So what we did was we got a piece of plexiglass and we cut it so that, because he had to look at it, at the guitar, what? And so we made a gobo out of the plexiglass. So the guitar was in a box attached to him, and he was singing, and that worked. There were so many edits on that particular song.
Yeah.
On the multi-track, edit after edit after edit after edit.
Wow.
And then again on the 2-track, that I thought, I was the assistant on, Tom Fly was the engineer. That I thought that the term edit meant edit. Ed Freeman, edit.
I don't think I knew that you assisted on that song.
Yeah.
It's another one of my favorites growing up.
Oh, it was great working with him. Yeah, it was fun.
Masterpiece of a song.
Great rhythm section.
I suppose the next big step after Yoko was Get Your Wings. How did you?
Actually, before Get Your Wings,
Yeah.
because I was engineering Billion Dollar Babies and had worked on Schools Out. So I had a good relationship with Bob Ezrin.
Right.
And so Bob said, "Do you want to produce the next Alice album? It's going to be the last group album." And he said, "I hate funerals. I don't want to do it. You should do it." So before Get Your Wings, I produced Muscle of Love. Muscle of Love. And so what happened that brought me to Get Your Wings was that I had worked on the Dolls' first record. As an engineer, I was engineering it, and Todd Rundgren, who was producing it, hated it. I mean, he hated every moment in the studio with them. He just hated it because he was about stuff that was pristine and tight. And I remember David Johansen, who's a dear friend of mine, we talk about this and we crack up. So we're doing Personality Crisis. David's in the booth driving the band by singing, and the band's playing, and Johnny Thunder's all fucked up, but he's great, you know, and this is going on. Todd's sitting next to me, and he's going, "God, this is awful." I said, "You know, they're not great musicians, but together it's really cool, you know, like a cool noise, like different." He said, "Oh, brother, different, all right." And then, so now they come in, and David walks in. David's a smart guy, and he's brilliant, actually. But David walks in, and not knowing what else to say, Todd says to him, "That's going to sound really great when we put harmony all around it." And David looks at him and says, kind of taking the piss a bit, "Harmony? Are you accusing me of having melody?" And that did it. And Todd, like, he would call it in. "How's it going today? I can't make it." So basically, he left us, like, the patients were running the asylum now. It was me and them, but we got the record done. And Todd came in and we mixed the whole thing in maybe 3 days. Now, Lieber and Krebs managed it. And they also managed Aerosmith, but that was the baby band. So now they want to make a change. They want a different producer. Lieber and Krebs, they're like, "Hey, we got to reward you. You pulled that thing off. So how about you go and see them in Boston and talk to them and see if you can get the gig." And so I went up to Boston. Aerosmith was playing in a high school. And they didn't want to have anything to do with me because they hated me. They thought I came from Columbia Records, and, you know, I was going to. But we sat there, and they realized I was a musician, you know, that my favorite band had been the Yardbirds. And I knew all the shit that they did. We were like in the same. And they were like, "Oh, he's one of us, really." And so we went into the studio, and that's another long relationship, very similar to Cheap Trick and John.
Get Your Wings, I read this review, it says, is the album where Aerosmith became Aerosmith, shedding their influences and developing their own trademark sound. Now, previous to that, Stephen was almost sounding like he was an English choir boy, wasn't he?
Yeah.
It's very like
He has
this.
this voice. He started singing like that on you know, like Lord of the Thighs or something.
Yeah.
Where doing. I said, "Stephen, what the fuck? What is that voice?" He said, "Let me hear you sing it like natural." And he opened up with this big, beautiful, edgy voice. And I said, it practically blew the microphone out. And I said, "Whoa, wait a minute. That's it." And so that was the change. And of course, the other secret ingredient of that album was Dick Wagner and Steve Hunter, who came in to play on a couple of tunes, notably Train, kept it rolling, and they take individual solos. They never took credit for it, and wouldn't had not Joe Perry, you know, let the cat out of the bag many years later and said, "You know, I have to say those guys really." And what they did was they taught, one guy was Brad and the other guy was Joe. And they taught them what they were doing so that when they went out on the road to support those records, they were playing those solos. And so they came back off the road when we got to Toys in the Attic. They were completely different guitar players, completely different. But yeah, I mean, I think, you know, coming to New York to make the record, making the record with Jay Messina and myself. And that was the first rock record Jay had ever done. He was he wondered, he was the jazz guy and the jingle guy. And he wondered why I would want him to do the record. And I said, because all those jazz records and jingles sound great, and you get it. You understand it. You can do rock. And now,
Now he's Jay Messina.
Now he's Jay Messina.
Obviously, Toys comes up, which is, with Rocks, two of the most influential rock albums of all time. What was the mentality going in to do Toys that made it so different, such a step up?
The drugs were working. On Toys, everybody was contributing, and that was the first time that you saw people coming up with. I mean, Tom Hamilton came up with Sweet Emotion. You don't expect all these guys in the band were coming up with different stuff. Although Stephen will deny it, Joey came up with boom, doc, boom, boom, ba, boom, boom.
Yeah.
It was a communal effort, and it was a very long pre-production period because they came off the road with no songs, so everything had to be developed in.
And you were doing that in the studio?
No,
okay.
we did it in Boston, a studio up there that we just used. It was it was a shitty studio, but we could record stuff if we wanted. Augusty it was called in Boston, Augusty Studio. So we did our pre-production there for that record. What made the difference in the next one, Rocks, was that they had even less material when they came off the road, but they had lots of ideas, and they were, they really had a lot of experience. They let the R&B part of them, instead of wanting to be Led Zeppelin. I mean, Toys in the Attic is all over the place in a way, but this was going to be much more focused on the funk and feel, and the explosive sound of it, and that we recorded in their warehouse, which is where we were rehearsing, and the warehouse became a big tool for how that thing was recorded. The sound of the warehouse was very important.
When Jack said to me he was going to make an Aerosmith record, and would I be interested in engineering it, he said, but you've got to take this, and he gave me Rocks to listen to. And I knew it was a test, but I didn't know what the test was. But I'm driving in Karsha's car, and I put the CD on, and I listened to it, and I'm about 3 or 4 songs in. Of course, I knew the album, but I wasn't listening to it from a perspective of, what should I be listening for? And I got this overriding sense that it was recorded in one room.
Yeah.
So I call him up from the car, and I go, he's like, so you listened to it, what do you think? And I was like, I've just got one question. What room did you record it in? And he goes, you get it.
Yeah. It was a big, big room, a warehouse. And every day that we would rehearse, I would go in early and do something, put a couch over there, put some rugs up on the wall, keep treating this big room until there was some control over it. And then I think, and I like to say that it's the record that is the most truthful, because that room dictated everything about how it should be played. I mean, I hadn't planned on recording there, but I didn't want to leave the room once it was set up. It dictated the key that the song should be in. Everything was dictated by how it sounded in that room. And so I think there's a unifying thing to that record. I remember, a lot of people asking me, how did you get that sound? I mean, the outside of the room itself was a big garage, and that's where we parked the remote truck. And what I did was I opened the doors and put mics in this garage, which was really ambient, and picked up that as well. Compressed the hell out of it. Bob's your uncle.
I want to fast forward a few years. John Lennon had stopped making records after Rock and Roll. What's the last album he did?
Walls and Bridges.
Walls and Bridges was the last album?
I think so.
So 75?
Yeah.
So 75. And now, had you remained friends? You still been hanging out in those 4 years or so?
I hung out during the Lost Weekend with him in Los Angeles.
Oh, wow.
While he was doing the Rock and Roll album. I was designated, because I was not doing drugs or drinking, really. I became the designated driver to get them away from whatever was going on, the getaway driver. And so we had this Cadillac that John had rented. It was a big car, and I would get the car. and we would be maybe in the Roxy, or we would be in somewhere, and they would be manhandling John out and throwing him in the backseat of the Cadillac. I would have to get, and there'd be a mob around us like Day of the Locust, and I would have to get through it. And John actually, he was so crazed that he kicked the rear windshield out of it. It was insane. But those were pretty insane days. But May was great in keeping them under control. We had lunch one day. John says, "Come on, there was a place called Lost on Larrabee. It was a restaurant that he liked on Larrabee, and we had lunch with Mal Evans."
Oh wow!
And it was so cool. I mean, listening to John and Mal reminisce was wonderful. And John loved him. Yeah, he was great. A big, goofy guy. He was a sweetheart. The cops shot him not long after that because he was running around his front yard crazed with a BB gun. You know that. Yeah. Then I lost contact with him when John became the house husband and was baking bread and the dad and all that stuff. But I ran into him at a health food restaurant on the east side. He had just come from giving Sean swimming lessons. He had him in a pool and at the YMCA across the street from his place. And he came in to get something. And he came up behind me, and I saw my wife look up, because he came up behind me and he put his hands over my eyes and said, with that accent you couldn't miss, "Guess who?"
Yeah.
And I guessed a bunch of different people.
You said Ringo.
Yeah, just the wrong people. And then he sat down with us and he said, "What are you doing? How you doing? I haven't seen you in so long, blah, blah, blah." And he said, here's my personal phone number. Come talk to me, tell me what's going on in the business. I'd love to hear it. And I live 2 blocks from him. And I didn't, because I don't want to interfere. He doesn't need to know what's going on in the business. He's retired. So I didn't bother him. And then a year later, I get the phone call, the infamous phone call from who knows who, one of the assistants, who said, and the funny thing was, I was working all the time. I was starting to get like, what am I doing? What are these records I'm making are okay? But I could go for something really exciting. And when I got back to my house on 76th Street, I heard the phone ringing. I had 3 floors of a brownstone. So I would go in the bottom one. You have to go through a gate first, and then the door. I could hear. Taking my time. I get the door open. It's getting louder. Jesus, whoever this is really who wants to talk. I pick it up, and the voice is, "If you want to do something really new and exciting, you will go to where the seaplanes land at 38th Street and the East River tomorrow at noon." Who could resist that, right? So
sounds like the Maltese Falcon. Or something.
Yeah, it was like, come on, yeah. So I went there. A seaplane picked me up, pulled right up to the dock. I got in it. It flew over into Long Island, over the Sound, and pulled into just off of Glen Cove, one of those coves there in Long Island. Pulled onto a little beach, and Yoko greeted me. And come in, said that they had this wonderful home there. And she said, "John wants to make a record, but no one can know that he wants to make this record, or that he's gonna make the record, or even when we're making the record, no one can know." Okay. And I'm gonna be on it too. Okay. So John's gonna call you in a half an hour on this phone, and he wants to talk to you. So I picked him up, and John said, "Okay, Yoko, hi, Jack." Hi. He said, "Yoko's going to give you an envelope. It's for your ears only." And And she gave me the envelope. In the envelope were 2 cassettes with all of these demos that he had made down in Bermuda. They were really primitive, and funky and cool, actually. So anyway, he said, listen to him and tell me whether it's shit or I should go into the studio and do something with it. He said, I want you to give me an honest answer. I said, okay, I will. Then Yoko said, and these are my demos. Oh, okay. Okay, so I had hers. Back and I went home. I listened to his cassette. I saved hers for the next day. Had so many reels. I listened to his cassettes. The next day, he called me. And he said,
jumping out to you?
Huh?
What was jumping out to you?
Everything. Everything. I thought it was absolutely brilliant. I mean, all those songs that the Beatles went in and did over those cassettes, the 2 or 3 songs that they did were on that cassette. Plus, that cassette had dialogue in front of each song and behind it, him talking, saying, I don't know how this one is, take it, check it out. And then he'd go, I don't know, it sounds like the same old shit to me, I don't know. And then sometimes he'd go, I think this one would be good for Ringo, not for me. And anyway, I listened to all of them, and he called me up and he said, what do you think? And I said, just release these cassettes. They're incredible. I can't beat it. They have like this thing about them that's so cool, because what he did was he would record the cassette, play and sing, then he would bounce it just using the speakers from one blaster and record it on another blaster, but double his vocal and add some other instrument. And that's what they sounded like. And Fred Seaman would be banging in a cotton band in the background. And they were really cool. So he said, so you like it? I said, yeah, I love it. He goes, okay, we'll do a record. So I had to hire a rhythm section and not tell them whose record they were making. Because they could. Andy Newmark says he knew all along, but I don't know if he did or not. But the other guys didn't. And we rehearsed at SIR. We charted all of the songs. They were all charted, so I gave everybody charts. And I sang the songs terribly, but, I did the best so they get an idea of what it was. And then the last rehearsal was at the Dakota. And I just told the guys in Tony Levin, and I told them, meet me at the corner of 72nd Street and Central Park West for the next and last rehearsal. Tomorrow we go in the studio. And so it was like they knew. If we were meeting in front of the Dakota, they knew whose record they were making. And so we went up and we had like a dry rehearsal. Basically, John wanted to break the ice before we went into the studio so they wouldn't be all nervous. And we had a great time, and we kind of played acoustic guitar. Tony played an upright bass that was in the room. John played piano. We had a good time. And then on the way out, I was with Tony Levin, Hugh McCracken, and myself walking out. Everybody had gone ahead of us. At the door to the Dakota was a Fender Rhodes piano with a cassette machine on top of it. So if he had an idea when he came in or when he was going out, he could sit down and play it. So anyway, he stopped you and Tony and I, and he said, wait. I have one more thing you haven't heard that's not on any of the tapes. Oh, okay. He goes, I'm going to play it for you. Just tell me what you think. And he sat down at the piano and played Starting Over and sang it. And I said, okay, we got our single. And we went in and did it.
Amazing. What was the first song you cut?
I think Nobody Told Me There'd Be Days Like This.
Nobody told me.
Yeah.
But wait there, Nobody Told Me, didn't that come out?
Came out on
Milk and Honey.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you were cutting songs for both albums?
I cut all of those songs that turned out because the thing was I did live vocals on everything. Many of them I used. Sometimes I would just correct a few things with an overdub, but the live vocals were always really good. And so, we had all the live vocals, so that when Yoko went in to do Milk and Honey, she had something to work with.
I remember, what year is this? What I'm looking at here, everybody, is Double Fantasy stripped down. And this is 2010.
Yeah.
And I remember you had done this in New York and you flew back. And when I saw Will Lee yesterday, he told me he came down.
Yeah.
While you were working on this record.
Yeah. He and Hugh McCracken both came down.
Amazing. And so you flew down to LA and we went into the Neve room in my old studio.
Yeah.
And we listened to the whole of Double Fantasy stripped down, standing in front of the speakers, not saying a word. And I'll be honest, I was crying. It was pretty emotional.
Yeah.
Because I grew up on Double Fantasy as being one of my favorite records, probably my favorite record. And here I am listening to Jack's raw version. So I suppose the question is, why did you do a raw version? Is it because John famously didn't like the sound of his voice? I mean, that's an oversimplification.
Yeah, he didn't, and he doubled everything.
Right.
And the thing was that the live tracks and the live rhythm section and the way it sounded to us when we were doing it was so good. You know, I asked Lee DiCarlo if he wanted to come work with me on it, and he absolutely declined. Said, "I'm out of the business.
Oh well.
I'm retired, and I run a fleet of fishing boats." his life's dream to do that, and so he said, "No, nothing could drag me to do that." Okay, and I always wanted Jay to get his hands on it, but I owed it to Lee to ask him first.
Sure.
And Jay was thrilled to do it with me, and it was so wonderful. There's a story that goes with this as well.
Please.
Because I had to get all of the tapes to go through them, to find different things, because I wanted to include a little bit of dialogue, a little this, a little that. And so, and then I said to Jay, we need the best D to A converters, because we're going to be, we're going to be taking it off we can't work, with just the analog anymore. We're going to convert to digital, and we want the best stuff to do this. So he said, okay, I'll check into it. So he called me back. He said, Battery Studios, they got the best stuff. And so I called up Battery, and I said, I'm not a Columbia client, though I've been, one of your boys. And they said, no, we know who you are, Jack. They said, but it might be, you might have a problem with coming here to working on this. So I said, why is that? And they said, well, we're at 321 West 44th, record plant, in that building. And I said, well, that's not a problem. They said, well, we're on the 10th floor where the record plant was, the last place I worked with John. I said, well, that's a little rough. They said, the room that you would be working in is the last room you worked with John. And nothing has changed. That's the room. It's still the same, still looks the same, but that is the room that we use for this, for playbacks and conversions. I said, maybe there's a reason for this. So now I've got stacks of multi-tracks, and I'm going through it. And at first, when I put the tape on to find something, John was a ghost to me. He was a ghost in this room. I'm hearing his voice. He's talking. After a while, he wasn't a ghost anymore. He was a collaborator. He was telling me where things were. Things like, on this song, instead of a guitar solo, I'd like to have a sax solo. In fact, here's the melody I want. And he sang the melody of the sax solo that he wanted in the spot. And so on the record, I didn't use the sax solo. I used his vocal. So he was leading me with all of this information that was on these tapes that I could use while I was doing the stripped down version. Now, every 3 days or so, Yoko would come by to hear what we were doing, and she'd approve it. But I started working with my Phantom speaker synthesizer, which is a box that was made and then they decided that there was no use for it because it dealt with phase. There was a mixer and a head that was this big that had the works in it, that they said don't open it because it's spring loaded and everything will pop out, so no one knows how we built this thing. And it was the only one they had, and they gave it to me in the mid 70s to do this, or towards the end of the 70s to it had 6 360-degree pan pots, and you'd put something in there and it'd come out stereo, and it would go behind you, and wherever you pulled the stick, that's where it went over your head or full. I was using phase. So I was working at that time when I got that in Studio C at Record Plant, and down the hall was a cutting room. So what I'd do is I'd try it on Aerosmith. I would try it, and then I would run with the tape down to the cutting room to see what would happen. And the cutter head would lift because of the amount of phase that was being used. So you could use it on something like maybe some very high, maybe some reverb you could put back there. Nothing below 1,000 cycles. You didn't like anything below 1,000 cycles. But anything else you could put back there. Rock in a hard place. That's what I was using it on. So now I call up Ramza.
Oh, Ramza, yeah.
So I call up Ramza, and I said, listen, you gave me this Phantom speaker synthesizer. I can't use it because the cutter head, you can't put it on a record. Only the little bit of, some jingle jangle. That's about it. Oh, okay. So I said, what do you want me to do with it? They said, just keep it there. Okay. So now I put it on a shelf. Now I go over to Midem in the south of France, and I guess it was Philips. They're showing the CD. So they're playing CDs there. They're not even on the market yet. So I go to the guy and I say, so what happens if something is really out of phase and I put it on the CD? He goes, Laser doesn't know. It's gonna, whatever it is, that's what it's gonna be. Oh, really? Yeah. So now I go back to New York. I call up Ramza. I said, listen, you know that Phantom speaker synthesizer? Yeah. Well, and I took $10,000 out of my bank account. I put it over here and I said, that's what I'm going to give them if they'll take it. Would you consider selling it to me? Because I'd like to fool around with it a little bit more. Selling it to you, you can have it. I still have it. So now, I still have it. It's a good secret weapon. So now, I'm doing the stripped down version, and I can't remember which song it was.
I'm trying to think what we should listen to.
But anyway, what I did was John is talking at the end of the song. And what I did was I took his vocal, because I didn't do much that kind of thing. And I wanted to be simple, but I took his vocal and I put it over here where you are. His speaking voice, dry, right here. You're listening. His talking voice is here. So now Yoko is listening to this, and at the end of it, he starts talking, and he's talking to her, and he's right here. And she turns to look over, and she says to me, he's in the room. And I said, and she got upset, and she started crying. And I said, I'm so sorry. I won't do that. She said, no, it's beautiful. Do it, okay, do it. It's wonderful. Can I hear that again? She listened, I don't know how many times, to him talking over here on the side of anyway, that Phantom speaker synthesizer. There's little pictures of a head on it too. So you're going around and shows you where it's going. You have to be dead center, of course, to listen to it. And she would always be dead center, really listening.
So a few years ago, we went to NAMM, 12 years ago or something. Do you remember that? And I met you up at the Gibson booth.
Yeah.
So we're up at the Gibson booth, and they have all these acoustic guitars all over the wall. And they have, I can't remember, I think it was a J160E, and they had Lennon's, self-portrait on it, and signature, and it was being sold as the John Lennon signature guitar. And the guy, I don't remember who he was very proud about it. And Jack sort of sidles up to me as I'm being told about this guitar. He's like, well, this is the guitar that John used to write this and write that and write that. And the whole time he's saying this, I'm looking at him going, stop. I was trying to, because I could tell he was just sticking his foot right in his mouth. And Jack was like, it's really cool, but if you wanted to put it on the right guitar, you should have done it on this one around the corner.
Yeah. Like any guitar player, when we're in the studio to do double passing, now he's coming back after all these years. So he's insecure. He wants to make sure he's got all the bases covered. So he brings all his guitars. I mean, there was just, 12 cases outside in the room. And so I said, John, let me check out what you only used one guitar the whole time. Yeah. That weird looking Sardonicus or whatever it was called, with the rails. And I said, let me check out what you have. Maybe we'll try something different. He used a Strat on Walking on Thin Ice, but that was the only time he picked up the Strat. So anyway, I'm opening all the cases, and I get the one case is really beat up. It's short. Oh, is this it? I open it up, and it's the Black Ricky. You could see that it had been repaired. I don't know. I mean, the headstock. But it looked great. It was still. I picked it up, and I turned it over, and on the other side of the body was taped the Shea Stadium set list. It was taped to the back. Oh, I had this icon in my hand, so I put it down. So now, a few weeks later, Rick Nielsen comes in. I've got Rick coming into Rick and Bunny to play a couple of tracks with the band, with Tony Levin basically and John. And so we're doing stuff, and I go, we got to check this out. Rick is a big collector of guitars, Rick Nielsen. So I take him over. He sees the short case. He's got an idea of what might be in it. I said, go ahead, open it up. He opens it up. He picks it up, and he starts crying. He just is like, oh my God. Oh my gosh, so turn it over. He turns it over. Now it's fountains. I can't believe I'm holding this in my hand, And he put it back. And then he took some pictures of it. And a few weeks after that, a package came delivered to John. And he opened it up, and it was a Hamer. It was an exact reproduction in scale of the Rickenbacker, because John had rather small hands, so he liked that 3/4 size. So it had the same fret feel, the fretboard feel, same kind of body feel. And when John paid him, he gave him a check for $1,000 or something. Of course, Rick never cashed that check.
No, put it on your wall.
Yeah, he put it on the wall, but he took the signature and traced it. And so Hamer made this John Lennon guitar. Only one was John Lennon guitar 0001. And it was all white. All white. And on the bottom was John's signature in red mother of pearl. And absolutely just gorgeous. And there's some pictures around of John holding it up, and I think it's at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame or somewhere now, but he was just thrilled that Rick gave him that as a present. And of course, Rick and Bunny have never forgotten. In the back of my mind. Now, Cheap Trick was down in Montserrat recording with George Martin. So George was a friend that I knew pretty well. And so I called George up in Montserrat, and I said, is it okay if I have your guy up here? Can I borrow a couple of mine? And he said, absolutely. And they came up and played on the record. But in the back of my mind, what I had intended was that Cheap Trick might become the touring band for John. That's what I was hoping might happen.
That's amazing. Yeah, that would have been an incredible thing if it happened.
Yeah, I thought that was. So
the guitar was a Sardonicus or whatever it was.
Yeah,
I've been asked about it 100 times.
It had 2 rails on it. Yeah. It was a really strange looking.
And that's most of the record.
It's every electric part. for the most part, the acoustic was a terrible, but we got a good sound out of it.
Yeah.
The hope, what? Yeah,
Innovation.
innovation.
Wow. I don't know if I knew that, or if I did, I blanked it.
Yeah,
Designed by helicopter pilots.
yeah.
Was it the Adamus with all the pretty thing all over it?
No, it was very simple.
Right.
Like they gave it to him. There you go.
Yeah.
Like they gave him every guitar you could think of.
Yeah.
We didn't get to use that red Strat, but that Fender sent over to
Yeah.
us, and he just put it away. But when we got to Walking on Thin Ice, which was basically a bunch of loops
Yeah.
that we played over, and he sat next to me and played that famous solo, and I worked the whammy bar. He didn't like working the whammy bar. Okay, thank you everybody. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Jack. It was absolutely amazing. I really appreciate it.